Similarly, in seeking a way forward for Northern Ireland, she made a controversial decision to involve the government of the Republic in negotiations about the province, which led to the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1985.
Inside, the two leaders put their names to the agreement. The two are united in hoping it will reduce violence in the province by isolating the extremists. But in terms of selling it, their needs are very different.
Although far from successful or conclusive, it was the start of a process which continued under John Major with the Downing Street Declaration and eventually under Tony Blair with the Good Friday Agreement.
She took the first steps on what was a very long road, and it's taken a long time for us to get to where we've got to now. But I think she deserves credit for that.
Despite Margaret Thatcher's myriad achievements, it was her own party that ousted her from office. But her departure did not heal the party. Neither could she be restrained from trying to exert her influence on party affairs.
He's terrific. Have you seen his policy statement? We've got something to direct our debates to. It's got the best organised conference. It's a prelude to victory.
Is he tough enough on Europe, do you think?
Well, we all cooperate with Europe, but we're going to keep our sovereignty. We're British.
It is that idea of sovereignty and Britishness which seemed to fuel her far more controversial remarks at a reception this evening. In private, she's known to take a far from flattering view of the countries of continental Europe, especially the Germans, but has always been careful about her public utterances on the subject. Tonight she threw caution to the wind, and with William Hague smiling and applauding beside her, she spoke her true mind.
Britain still has an important place in the world. We're quite the best country in Europe. Like I said, I'm going to have to be careful what I say, and I don't like it. Like I said, in my lifetime, all our problems have come from mainland Europe. And all the solutions have come from the English-speaking nations across the world.
After she'd lost office, after 2 or 3 years, she became sort of crazily Eurosceptic and put everything down to Europe, her own fall from office and everything else, began to make wild remarks from time to time on the subject. And nevertheless, her support for people like Hague and Duncan Smith was very valuable because the Conservative Party faithful were increasingly Eurosceptic. Pro-Europeans were leaving us in both voting terms and membership of the party. They were going on to the Liberals mainly. What was left was becoming a Eurosceptic party.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
About Europe, about the problems in Europe. Do you stand by those comments this evening?
Well, I had hoped that some of you might have heard of World War I and World War II.
Mrs. Thatcher even adopted a new persona to remind party members of just who was head of the Tory family.
We've still the same convictions, we've still got a strong leader, and Granny is still around.
Since she left office, I think her influence has been enormous. In some ways, it's been very difficult for her Conservative successors, all of whom have found themselves with a party that really wants her back and that will not accept any alternative, not until somebody young enough to be her grandson has come along in the form of David Cameron, and he's found it very hard going to try and reform the party in his thinking.
Until the memory of Mrs. Thatcher and her government absolutely fades from the public memory, British people will never vote for the restoration of any form of Thatcherism. And enthusiasm for return to that kind of politics and that kind of conservatism is limited to elements in the Conservative Party and amongst a particular kind of Conservative voters.
If Mrs. Thatcher divided her own party, she had an almost greater impact on the opposition. By the time Tony Blair was elected new Labour Prime Minister in 1997, the S word, socialism, had all but been banned.
The size of Mrs. Thatcher's majority in 1983 and the fact that she had a substantial win again in 1987 had to be taken by the Labour Party as an instruction about what we had to do in response, that simply kicking against the traces and being a perpetual party of protest wasn't a serious possibility, not for a party that wanted to secure the support to be democratically elected.
If we could have the first agreement signed, please.
By contrast to her significant influence on the Labour Party, her impact on the position of women in politics is considered negligible.
One of the extraordinary paradoxes about Margaret Thatcher was that she wasn't a sister. She had come through the system as it was, and she had succeeded. She was quite scathing about feminism, and particularly about those movements that said, the reason we don't get to high positions is because the system won't let us, or the men won't let us, or somebody is stopping us. And her response would always have been, well, there's a system, try it. And I agreed with her with that. The trouble was that even then her attitudes were those of her generation, but almost not of her time. And by that I mean she still saw men as more important. It was almost instinctive. During the whole 11 years that she was in power, she did not promote a single woman from the House of Commons, and there were a number that were pretty good, into the cabinet.
She is severely criticised by only having had one woman in her cabinet. Baroness Young, I think, was the first 2 years. And I think the only thing you can say is that she didn't think they were worth having in the cabinet. Now that may seem to be an extremely harsh judgment, but the record is there.
Margaret Thatcher's legacy is evident now and will continue way into the future. It is perhaps fitting that her role in Britain's political life was best summed up in 1991 by the then American President George Bush. On awarding her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he described her as the greengrocer's daughter who shaped the nation to her will. By whatever standard, and regardless of the contrasting assessments of her achievements, it's a remarkable story.
Indelibly to her credit is the fact that she had the guts and the tenacity to become leader of the British Conservative Party and to fight and win those elections repeatedly. Nobody can take that away from this very particular woman.
The single greatest achievement of Maggie Thatcher was to make this country governable once again by a democratically elected government. That has changed history, will carry on changing history. And for that, every future Prime Minister will owe her a huge debt of gratitude.
I think she stands as the greatest peacetime Prime Minister of the 20th century. It's hard, of course, to compare Prime Ministers in completely different circumstances. And so we have to rank Churchill and Lloyd George as great war leaders, as quite exceptional Prime Ministers, even standing alongside all the 3 centuries of Prime Ministers. But I think we can say of Margaret Thatcher that she was the greatest peacetime Prime Minister, and had it not been peacetime, she wouldn't have been found wanting then either.